to be a rapper and change the world with my music. That is so corny. Here, let me show you what I mean. It's a beautiful day up in my neighborhood. I'm with my smelly brother Keith, but I'm feeling good. Scribbling thoughts on my words past the margin. Switches on the beat and Miss Washington's in her garden. And I'm so real that nothing is superficial. Headed to my school that's called Peachtree Middle. My presence is a present and my gift is eternal. My heart's on my sleeve and my rhymes in my journal.
Hi, I am Ada Bobino. Take my glasses off. And we are so glad that you're tuning in and keeping up with us for this festival this year, SABIFF 2022 and Animation in Black. We have a really exciting panel for you today that is going to really delve into the topic of diversity. And we've brought together some heavy hitter action-packed figures in the diversity, inclusion, and equity field. And so I'm going to have our board member and team member, Camille Ward, host Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Action Beyond Buzzwords. So I'm bringing Camille. Hey, Camille Ward. Lord,
hey, Ada, good afternoon. How are you?
I am good. So I'm just going to get out the picture, but I really want this to be a very impactful panel, and I know that it will be. So I'm going to, without further ado, I'm going to exit, and I'm going to bring on our guest.
Okay. Good afternoon. Good morning. Good day. Hello, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. We're excited that you're joining us for the 4th annual San Antonio Black International Film Festival. Thank you all for joining us. Right? Hey, this year,
happy to be here.
Yes, this year we are in your wheelhouse. We're hosting Animation in Black. So we want to let everyone know that Black people are all in animation on all levels. We are directors, writers, talent, content creators, producers, providers, all that good stuff. For this particular panel, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, what I find really interesting is that it's a thing right now. Diversity, equity, inclusion is a thing. I'd like each of you to introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about you, and tell me how come DEI is a thing for you, your company, and where you are. Why don't we start with Alison, because she's right up top looking right at me. Hi, Alison. How are you?
I'm okay. As I had said, I'm a little sick, so I'm going to try to bring my energy game to y'all. But if I sound a little slow, you'll know why. So I've been in animation for over 20 years. I actually started off as an artist, and I then fell into creative recruiting. So my job was to build teams in animation. I've worked at almost every major studio, Nickelodeon, Disney, Illumination, Sony. And it was always really important to me that we had well-rounded teams. As I grew my career and there was conversations around diversity, I would submit candidates to my different productions. They'd be like, "This is a great list of candidates, Alison, but where's the diversity?" And like, knowing what I knew, like at the time, I didn't realize how challenging the career pathways were into our space. How broken the system was between education, government, and the studios in making kind of that change. And so I spent more time moving people around where there might be diverse individuals at one studio, and then I would convince them to come over to my studio, and then they would our studio would have better numbers. And so the optics of the studio was better, but we weren't really solving the holistically how to make how to create those access points even greater. And so around my time in when I was working at Illumination, my friends and I, Nicole Hendricks and Jill Gilbert, we decided to form the BRIC Foundation, which stands for Break, Reinvent, Impact, and Change. And it's about creating access points for women and underrepresented groups that want to excel in creative leadership. And the idea is, after 20 years of working in the animation and gaming space, I knew that everybody was having very similar conversations around how to bridge the inequity into the arts, but nobody was like really unifying. So we started off with having summits where everybody would come together and help solve. So we had government officials, we had educators, we had studio professionals, all under one roof, coming together to figure out how that solved. And as of, so we've been around for 5 years now. We just registered the first ever statewide apprentice program here in California. We did that by updating the standards of what's being taught in all of California CTE high school programs when it comes to animation, VFX, and gaming. And then we worked with the studios to build this apprentice program that will have a certification. So those individuals that are socioeconomically disadvantaged have a pathway into our workforce that go beyond going to an expensive art school. So I think we need to start looking at like education. And then the other thing we do is working with lobbyists and government officials on different bills when it comes to the arts and how animation is really viewed in VFX and gaming, which we aren't categorized correctly. And so when bills come out, we are not actually qualified to receive some of these grants or tax incentives that our entertainment partners might be receiving. So we work on every facet on making change and bringing people together, not just the one area of like putting it on the studio. And for me, I feel it's about empowering perspective, and I think the entertainment industry is only as good as the people that's in it. And if it's limited to a certain type of human or their ability to get in, then we're not doing our job to really bring the type of narratives that deserve to be out into the world, to this real diverse world that we live in. And so that's my motivation for what I do and why I formed BRIC and continue the activism. And then I'm a talent rep now, so I threw away my executive career to rep talent behind the scenes to help people get to where they want to be. So I'm a manager and co-president of Fourth Wall Management right now as well.
That is excellent. Wonderful. So much that the foundation does. We're so happy to have you. Farrell, tell us a little bit about it, sir.
Thank you, Camille. And that was a great introduction. Alison got us rolling here. From Farrell Hall, and I'm in Toronto, Canada. So I help bring the international to the San Antonio Black International Film Festival. So happy to be here in Toronto. I currently work for 9 Story Media Group, and we produce a whole lot of great shows like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and we're really proud of our newest, which is Karma's World, co-created by Ludacris. So please catch that show. So I've been working in the space of DEI over the last 10 years. I was just thinking, I started in 2012. I'm going to tell you the quick story of how I started. My professional background is as an HR leader. And I just had an opportunity when I was working in an organization to step into a project role and to help roll out what was called a diversity program to my organization for the very first time with a whole lot of trepidation. I loved HR. And I realized as I had practiced HR my entire career, I'd practiced through an equity lens, even though I didn't recognize that word at the time. But when I worked in this project and had all the definitions spelled out to me, I was like, this is me. And I became even more on fire than I normally am about the work. And I was like, this is my path going forward. So I've been doing this mostly in our Canadian public sector. So 2 kind of major systems I worked in were the public school sector. I worked for a school board, and I worked in child welfare. And as I say that, there needs to be a little pause, because those are 2 critical sectors where this work of DEI or EDI is really critical. We have these young minds coming to be educated and led out into the world. We need to support all identities in all respects, recognize them as they are, welcome them, and educate our educators to make space for them. Similarly with child welfare, at least in Canada, and I bet across the States too, child welfare has a pretty sullied reputation. It's been led through a biased colonial lens. Wow. Where it had a normative definition of what a family looks like, and it tended to exclude people who are racialized and from marginalized communities. And so they have suffered, they've been brought into the child welfare system the most. And so there's lots of work to do. As challenging as those two sectors were, it gave me lots and lots of experience and lots of opportunities. I don't see anything as a door slamming in my face. There's always opportunity because I've probably seen it somewhere before. So I was happy to be recruited over into this world of television animation production here at 9 Story Media. Way back in my background, I did work in radio in our Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So I have a little bit of media experience. So happy to bring all my experiences together into this industry. And as I was watching over the past years, the hashtag of Oscar So White was not lost on me. And I know that it permeates more than just the movie industry, live action, it's animation, it's everywhere. So this is like one of the untouched bastions of exclusion in the world right now is the entertainment industry. And I know we're very profit oriented and viewership's important, so we don't tend to take risks on marginalized folks, but the time is here, the time is now. So I'm happy to be bringing this work forward, happy to be at this festival, helping get this message out. That is what I do. That's why I do it. And that's where I am today. Hope that's helpful.
That's right. Excellent. Thanks, Farrell. Thank you so much. Rio, talk to us about you, my dear.
Hey, everybody. I'm in LA, and I don't know if you've seen the weather. It's supposed to be 107 today, so I'm just trying to stay cool.
Right.
But no, I'm Rio Cyrus. I'm former Disney, spent 10 years there, former Fox, spent 10 years there. And then after that, 20 years in studio entertainment, I went more independent. I worked for NBC through an agency and then worked with a lot of different independent content makers, content distributors, including Quibi, RIP Quibi. And in the last couple of years, have been fortunate to be a co-chair of AfroAnimation. And AfroAnimation is a not-for-profit organization that I helped, found with our founder, Keith Wyatt, where we really were looking to tap into what's going on in animation. And we were initially just trying to get content for a platform, content platform we were creating. And then as we were reaching out to creators, we were finding a lot of creators of color coming from Africa, from Europe, from different parts outside the United States. And their main thing was, we'd love to be involved in something like that, where we can also get access to our North American counterparts, because clearly the animation industry in the US is driving a lot of what's going on globally. And so, the first year we did it in 2021, it was phenomenal. We had over 70 guests, a lot of creators, a lot of writers, directors, etc. And then we did it again in 2022, and it was even bigger. And at that point, we reached out to major studios like Disney, DreamWorks Animation, etc., all the animation hubs, and they all participated. And I'm happy to say that our friend Jay on the panel here was a real supporter from day one, and even this past year hooked us up with the creators of the Proud Family from TV Animation. And so what we were finding was we were getting a lot of creators, and they were saying, how do I get my work out? Yeah. On the other hand, we were getting a lot of creators who had day jobs. So as I'm looking at the creative community, I actually have seen a lot of diversity, right? In terms of writers, in terms of animators, story artists. What I wasn't seeing, and one of these studios actually, claimed their own failure, and it was not Disney, in terms of putting diversity on the production track. So what we were seeing there was a lack of representation for directors, executive producers, development executives. And so with AfroAnimation, we were bringing together a lot of folks with a lot of varying talent. And I'm pleased to say that we've really opened the doors for a lot of folks individually. We've also opened some doors within the studios to say, okay, let's look beyond our typical recruitment process and see if we can't diversify, our representation. And honestly, for me as a marketer, when I was on the studio side, I was in marketing. And again, marketing tends to be very female driven. And so I was seeing a lot of females, but I wasn't seeing a lot of people who look like me. And at the end of the day, when we're talking about diversity, from a platform distribution standpoint, there's been a ton of diversity. It used to be that you're in animation, you try to go to features or television. Now we've got every studio with a streaming platform. We've got independent platforms. And so there's a ton of distribution. They all need content. They all need stories. And so I think that what I've been able to really, been passionate about is repping and pushing diversity of story. And also within animation, careers for non-artists. A lot of people are really afraid of animation because they're like, I can't draw, I'm not an animator, I'm not a story artist. And so if you're someone like me, I'm in marketing, I'm a suit. And, I think there needs to be a real outreach in terms of non-artist careers, because I think that from an artist standpoint, we are seeing a lot of diversity, and we are seeing more diversity. I wouldn't say a lot, I'd say more diversity. We've got shows like The Proud Family, we've got shows like, other animation shows, with Warner, et cetera. But again, I think from a production standpoint and seeing some other opportunities for non-artists, I think that's where my passion lies.
Oh my gosh, so amazing. That is awesome. We love AfroAnimation. I want to talk to Mr. Francis. But first, I want to ask Mr. Francis if he still parks his car.
Oh, so we're going there, are we?
We're going there. Yeah.
My Boston accent, I'm sure, will come out with different things, but I've been in California so long. There's a mixture of Boston, New York, and LA in there. So, well, first of all, thank you for having me. And anytime you're doing a panel and you come in last in terms of the presentation, there's not a whole lot more to add. My esteemed colleagues have sort of covered so much of the work we do, and we share some of the same issues and concerns. So from my part, I will just say, as VP of Content and Inclusion at Disney TV Animation, it's all of that, but it's also the story. It's storytelling, and that ultimately, for me, that's where my greatest focus is. It's getting talent and stories that are relatable to a broader audience. And that, to me, is where my focus has been since I started this work 4.5, 5 years ago. I've been at Disney for 15 years. Started off in development, went over to current series, and then did a sort of mixture of both. And it was about 4.5 years ago that we sort of updated and I expanded my role into the diversity side. And again, it was very specifically talent outreach and diverse content, because I felt like that's what we were missing. And when asked the question, what would you do? Here's what I would do. And we started to having school outreach. We started looking for different avenues and roads for show creators and talent. So I'm very happy to say, just in these sort of past 4.5 years, we have sort of developed writing programs and shorts programs and writing workshops and, delving into music apprenticeships and what have you, just to put talent, up and coming talent, on our radar that would not have necessarily been on our radar had we not been sort of focused in on finding this. So, from my part, first of all, just being on this panel with this group is an amazing honor. I'm happy to be invited here, and we always want to support. I've done some work with BRIC. I've done some work with AfroAnimation. Farrell, we're gonna have to figure out how we're gonna do some stuff together, but I'm happy to be here. And you know, I think the reality is that we need to continue to have these conversations. And it's another way for me, I like to do these things just because of the outreach that this brings to us as well. So
I would like to have a conversation. So we're going to talk. So I'm going to ask you guys to unmute your mics and really talk about DEI, because when I first started, I said DEI is a thing. So when did DEI become a thing? Did it start after George Floyd's uh, murder and everyone, the country just took off into this stage of unrest? And then the studios and everyone else said, oh my gosh, we didn't know you felt this way. We didn't know. And so then you had all these initiatives towards DEI. Did it start there, or had it been happening before the big one, the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will?
If I could jump in, I was at Disney a long time ago, and Disney always had a diversity department. And again, I wasn't part of it, but there was always something called diversity. And in each of the positions I was in and the studios I worked for back then, Disney was distributing Miramax films. They were distributing, some other folks. And every year or so, we would do sort of a check. And it would be about how are we spending against diverse audiences? So I was in marketing. So for me, our focus was on, what agencies are we working with? And as we're looking to our big feature animated titles or feature live action titles, who are we targeting? We need to make sure that there's a real outreach for Hispanic families and Black families. And, so there was always a sense of, we need to do more and make sure that we represent and market to the world as it is. And then when I left Disney for 20th Century Fox, it was very similar. There was a diversity department. But again, I think that department, I won't speak for them, but it seemed to me that they were more focused on numbers. So executive numbers, how many executives of color do we have? And again, there was a real focus towards, women executives as well. So I think it's always been there permeating. And I will say my own experience has been positive in a sense that both of the major studios I worked for and the studios I distributed, including MGM and some of the smaller folks like Relativity, there was always an acknowledgement that diverse stories are going to be the ones that, get us success in terms of the entire slate. We're not just looking for a slate that looks like one aspect of the country. So I will say that's been my experience. Not that it's been amazing, but it's been at least there. I'm not going to say that, the two studios I worked with were ignoring diversity. I think that there was a different approach. I think after George Floyd, there was a real reckoning, and there were some really loud voices who were calling out major companies to say, let's take a look at your numbers. Let's take a look at your content. And I think that there were a lot of studios who really went on I wouldn't even say the defensive, I would say on the offensive to say, you're right. We do need to do better. And, I think there was a real focus on not only the content, but bringing in executives. Like, I will pick on Disney a little bit just because that was my former home. And they were really vocal about the fact, Bob Chapek is the CEO, and he's actually the first person that hired me at Disney. And they were really vocal about the fact that they wanted to do better in terms of executives, in terms of representation. And so I think that George Floyd was a catalyst. It was, something that lit the fire for a lot of folks. 2 years since, I've seen a lot of hires in the upper echelons of your Netflixes, your Amazons, different studios where they're bringing in major executives of color. I have a point of view on that we can talk about later. But I think that at least there was a real effort to say, if we don't have executives and directors and writers, we're not going to have diverse stories. And I think in the end, whether it's the bottom line or making sure that there's enough content for all the avenues of distribution, I think there was not even, it wasn't a major, I think, tension to say, let's reach out, let's do better. And so I would like to say that I'm on the sort of, I knew that there were a lot of studios. I'm on the side of, I know that they were acknowledging and trying harder. Since then, I think that's a separate question, but I do think that, DEI being a thing, I think it's just, I've heard, some folks say that, it's a thing, but I think what we've realized is diversity is just a fact. Like, just because we're talking about it doesn't make us any more diverse. We've always been diverse. There's, the world is diverse,
We've always been diverse. We've always been diverse, but there hasn't been, and I'm going to play the advocate just a little bit. I don't want to say devil's advocate. I'm an angel, so I play angel's advocate. But there is, but quite honestly, there hasn't been enough representation in front, on the screen, behind. We know that.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The one quote that I was going to finish was, diversity is a fact. We've always been diverse, the world at large. Inclusion is the choice that we've seen, that a lot of those folks that represent, distribution and storytelling, there has not been a lot of inclusion, and that's been a choice, whether it's been, an obvious choice or not. And then, of course, equity is the policy. So now we've gone beyond acknowledging that we're diverse. We've come into inclusion, but I think equity is where I think you were really about to go off on a tangent. The policies, the actual, real, what do we do about it? Yeah. That's, I think, what's been at the forefront in the last couple of years. So I'm going to stop talking for a second and let somebody else.
And Farrell actually put the E first. He said equity first, right?
Yeah. And when I short form what I do, I say I'm an equity leader. And then I say, people, I'm intending to say equity, diversity, and inclusion, but I will say I'm an equity leader, and I'll go into that in a minute. So if I just, were to answer your question that you started with, if I go back to 10 years that I stepped into this work, yes, there was diversity. I wasn't the first person kind of leading it, because I was able to find a diversity consultant come into our organization and help lead the work. Some of the things I remember back 10 years ago and going back, we only talked about diversity, and what it tended to look like was, just give us some numbers. So Farrell, we want somebody that looks like you, somebody that looks like they're from somewhere in the world, and then let's all stand in front of the building and take a company photo. That photo is really important.
Right?
We put it on the wall, we say, yay, we've arrived. And then if we were really advanced, what we'd also have, the most obnoxious thing, and I speak kind of frankly, I'm Canadian and I'm nice, but I say it all. We have this thing that people would call the international potluck, and they thought they'd arrived. So it's like, go home and bring a dish from your homeland. And if you could dress in your costume from your homeland, that was the article back then, right?
Look at us.
So insulting. And if I ever hear of the international potluck again, I will shoot somebody. So that was where we were 10 years ago. We've come along. And so now equity is the most important thing. But before I talk about it, I will share what an employee shared with me when I came to 9 Story. And I say it all, I just say it nicely. So May 25, 2020 is the day that George Floyd lost his life in front of all of us. It was a public lynching. And so this employee said to me, who's a racialized woman, she said, Farrell, George Floyd's death is the day that white people discovered racism.
Yeah.
Right. But we know it's been there all along for hundreds of years. But that horrible death amplified the situation. It made people uncomfortable. It made people and organizations say, what if they look at us? What are we doing? What are we doing? Do we have one of those people working here? Do we have a department? Do we have some? So everyone scrambled.
Yeah.
So that's both good and bad. It caused a lot of attention. It caused a lot of roles to be created, departments to be strengthened. It created some strategic plans around DEI. But what still happens is some resistance, which can be very subtle, to say, look, you're hired, we have a program, we have a thing, we're good.
You should be happy, you guys.
Right? Well, we've hit a quota, and I hate quotas because people say, what's wrong with you, Farrell? Because when we say, I need 30% of, people tend to stop as soon as they hit 30. And I'm like, what's wrong with 50%? What's wrong if it was 70%? So I want the data, but don't get locked in at hitting just the quota, go beyond that. So equity, as I keep this big lead up into it, diversity is the fact that we all have differences. All of us. Get any 2 people in the room, we have differences. So even Jay and I, we're both Black men, but underneath that, what kind of food do we like? Where in the world are we from? What languages do we speak? What's our education, etc.? There's diversity.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Let me get to my big equity because I'm dying to get it out. So just one quick second. Inclusion is the work of having more programs to include people in a meaningful way. But equity, the important part of equity is that it recognizes systemic barriers that we have all faced. So just putting someone in a room, on a show, on a crew is sometimes not enough, because soon after we say they're not working out, just as we expected. We didn't think people from that community would be successful. We have to remember and recognize they were denied employment opportunities, they were denied educational opportunities, denied exposure. So equity is recognizing that I'm putting programs, policies, and supports in place to prop them up. And it's not equality. Equity and equality, two different words, mean different things, and I preach equity. There we go.
Jay, I have a question. Do people want to really hear diverse stories? Do people really care about, let's say, the stories of African Americans, of Native Americans? Do people really want to hear and see those stories?
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. And I think it's been proven by the fact that, especially when you're talking in the kids and family arena, people have told you that by the choices that they make in terms of what they watch. Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to sort of think about the fact that, you know, with all these new streaming services and whatnot, you know, the reason that people cut the cord is because it was all based on technology, that we're just a binge society. So that's the reason why. That's part of it, sure. But the other part of it is that, especially in the kids, they're just more sophisticated now, number one. Well, yes. They've been sophisticated for a while.
Yes.
But they recognize that and I talk kids here, that they recognize, like, I'm not seeing me over here.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with this type of environment. I never see anything that sort of relates or connects to my experience. So you know what? I'm going to leave here and I'm going to go somewhere else and look for that. So, you know, to answer that question directly, yes, people are looking for authentic stories. They're looking for stories that connect with them more directly. It's not to mean that they dismiss everything else, but they have more choices now, and they're letting you know that, you know, you don't have enough that connects with me on this, so I'm going to go over here. And I think the reality of that is from a, you know, you can sort of, this whole discussion sort of often centers around the sort of business practice of it and the, what I call the sort of, the moral aspect of it. Again, as we reference the kids' business in particular, it's just like, it is so important in terms of a child's self-esteem to see themselves, see their experiences. It's developing how they look at life, how they look at themselves. And, you know, you used to talk about the idea of, like, the stereotypes of when you did see a person of color or an underrepresented person on TV, it was either the sort of I'm here and I'm on the screen for a couple of minutes and I'm gone, or I'm the villain, you know, and it was sort of that negative portrayal, which was not great, right?
Right.
But I would argue also that not seeing yourself at all is equally impactful, and not in a great way, because that means just like, well, at least on the other side, they knew we existed. Here, do they even know that we, you know, when there's no reference, there's no aspect of our lives at all represented on TV, in TV and films, then the question becomes, like, do we even exist? And for a kid growing up to say, do I exist, is really that's the question. And look, I think the reality is that the original question to all this is, in terms of what diversity is. For me, it was, and I won't go back to how far I started in this industry, but diversity was relevant and present in my life from the very beginning, when I walked into every meeting and there was no one that looked like me. And for years, that didn't look like me.
Right.
So from my standpoint, that was always in my mind. Now, I didn't have the job to sort of deal with that. My job was to do sort of different things, but it wasn't like there wasn't a thought in my mind. It was just like, how do I work within this scope? Because I grew up not seeing myself on screen, and now I'm in an industry where more often than not, I'm the only one who looks like me in the room. So I think for all of us, diversity, from depending on how you frame that question, diversity has always been the thing, as you said. Now, just the other side of this is the fact that I think that the question of how the timeline on this with regard to George Floyd, I think George Floyd sort of pinpointed and provided an opportunity to empower people now to tell their truths. But quite frankly, the work we were doing started from another sort of tentpole moment, and that was the Me Too movement. So I can sort of sit here and say everyone on this panel, has had diversity in front of them, because we've all looked at it from the standpoint of, I don't feel represented on any way, shape, or form in so much of the content we see. And I'm not just talking about the kids' side. I'm talking about everything, just in terms of, and that's just in front of the camera, and that's just from the actual stories.
That's right.
We could be here another 4 hours discussing behind the camera and whatnot. So I'm gonna stop there. But just to let you say, like the work we were doing in the DEI space was three and a half years before George Floyd. So we were already sort of going down this route. What George Floyd did was sort of really put a spotlight on it, but perhaps more importantly, it empowered others to talk about their truth. And I think that's what the difference was.
I think I love the fact, actually, that animation is powerful in that talent, content creators have the opportunity to introduce young minds to the world and various cultures and ethnicities in the world. And I think once that starts there, as they grow, they change, adapt, they welcome different looks and stories and cultures. Alison, I know that as you work with talent and you work with content creators, I would like you to tell me that people do want to hear stories of and see stories and images of young people from different parts of the world.
I mean, yes, I can tell you that I'm probably a little bit more cynical, because the reason why I took the new job that I have is because I felt like there was a lot of performativeness in the world, where I would be trying to champion women filmmakers or diverse filmmakers into director positions, and constantly being told it was a little bit of a risk. So I do believe, like, in good intentions. I don't think people have malicious intent. Farrell, you have a good point on equity. I think there's a lot of equity. I think we need to go beyond the checkbox and give people the opportunity to succeed in roles and not to feel like a risk. So if there is a risk, how do we mitigate that? What framework do we need to put around that person to make sure they succeed? There's a lot there, and it's not just about skill set, but I think it has to do with people meeting people where they're at. I find even in the recruiting process, there's a lot of bias when it comes into it.
Yes, there is.
And
tell the truth. That's the truth.
It's the truth. And I think recruiters and development executives who are like, they need to learn to identify different sorts of creative leadership, identify people that communicate differently, because like, we can't always ask people to code switch. Like, if you're a white female like myself, like, you have to meet them where they're, you know what I mean? Like, so
I love that you even know the term code switch. I love that.
I mean, we do a lot. I mean, I think when we talk about George Floyd, there was a lot of money being thrown around to different big organizations, which was wonderful, right? There was $100,000 here, $1 million here, like, great, like, that's making change. But when it came to, are they building, like, how are they tackling their recruiting departments? There's still like 3 people in a recruiting department that's asked to make like a cultural change, and they don't even have the education to do that.
No idea.
Yeah.
So like, to
Well,
me, that's so many of those different pieces. And then when it comes to like, there's an optics issue too. Like, you see all the things that are going on with some major studios and like mergers, and what and who and what is being impacted. Diverse stories and diverse humans. So like, Hollywood says stuff all the time. They move in a direction, and then it feels like sometimes we take a huge step back. So it's like, how do we keep the energy moving? How do we hold people accountable? And that's what, like, to me is most important, is like, we can't lose the energy just because of the inciting incident was, you know, a year or so ago. Like, that can't be the only reason why we move things forward. Like, it can't be one big event after another to remind people that this is something that's so flipping important. So I think, like, the more we can unite and make that, like, those connections, and we can stand together to remember about education and how to build teams and the importance of these stories, and not being quiet just because the world is a little bit more quiet, I think we'll continue to build on to that energy that we saw a year or so ago.
I think,
and Alison, if I could jump in, you mentioned the term risk, and the one thing that I've seen in my career, because again, as I've gone up the ranks, there have been fewer and fewer, not only women, but women of color in the boardrooms, in the executive rooms, and as you get to the president level, it's mostly white men. And what I'm seeing is, even when there is a high-ranking executive of color, the opportunity for that person to succeed or to fail there's not as much tolerance as there is for their white counterparts. And so I know there are a lot of studios have acknowledged that back, when we were a little closer to the George Floyd incident. But again, as you're seeing who the studios are cutting right now, or who's moving on, from these big executive roles. Some of them are, I know these people, so I know some of them are mutual decisions, but others are, this person's been the CMO for 2 years, and they've only had 2 years to make sweeping changes. They did not succeed in those 2 years, and now they're gone. Whereas their predecessors were able to fail and fail upward, continually for decades. And so it's, when I say that, I don't want to sound like we're all victims here, but I do think that there is that sort of intolerance, which is a huge cultural shift of allowing that Black person, that brown person, that diverse person, that that trans person to fail. And if they fail once, it doesn't mean that they're just done. They get an opportunity. They get to restructure. There's other things that happen when their white male counterparts have been able to fail up for decades and decades.
And Rio, to that point, like, I was at a major studio, and I saw like a white male would start to fail, like he was director on a feature, and then they would put another white male, and then another white male, and then there was like 4 males. But if it was a female or a person of color that was they would be out. They would just be out. There's
completely.
100%, and it happens all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
All the time. All the time. What can we do about that?
Do what we're doing right now. So part of it is acknowledging the reality. So, a lot of folks who know I do DEI work think it's all about being soft and being nice. It's kind of the opposite. It's being pointed, calling things out, acknowledging the reality, calling out those examples that you just mentioned here. Wait a minute, you have just uber supported this white director, and you wouldn't have done it for a racialized person or a woman. What are we going to do about it? And not just talk about it. Now, this is the program we're putting in place to support them. So some of the things we need to do is recognize where the gaps are. And instead of saying, oh, there aren't enough Black professionals, or they don't have enough experiences, go back a step. How do we give them the experiences? How do we mentor them, shepherd them, coach them, support them to be successful? And again, that's equity. And it does mean doing for a racialized person what I might not have done for a white man. And that is okay. That is equity.
And they're asking. That's the great thing about what has come out of the unfortunate unrest, is that they're asking, and I believe there's some sincerity and them wanting to try to rectify the situation. And so a question came to me, well, if there really, really has been diversity, not just at the Walt Disney Studios, but I'm going to call Disney, if there really has been diversity, then how come it's taken so long to have a Black princess? Fair question.
If you're asking me, because I'm the representative of Disney here, I will say you could fill in the blank with why it's taken so long for anything to happen. I mean, I think the reality is, in our jobs, it oftentimes is good to sort of look back, but it's also making sure that you're not too focused on where we came from and how long it took, because I think the reality, there's plenty of work to do right now.
Sure.
I think the reality is that we talk all the time about systemic, across the board, and it's not just the entertainment industry; it's systemic. It's insane. That's been built in for years. So in terms of whenever I get sort of even asked that question in terms of why it took so long, that is my go-to answer, is because we have to break down hundreds of years of this. So I think, and I think everyone can speak to this, in the DEI world, you might get that incremental win. You might get that, oh, I got that program going, or I got this person in, and you should celebrate that. You should celebrate that. But there's always that follow-up caveat of like, but there's still so much work to do. And it goes with everything that we do, and we recognize that. So, specifically on Tiana, right? It's like, I hear you. But now I also look at what we're doing at the Disney parks with regard to, replacing Splash Mountain with a Tiana, with a Tiana ride, and that's great. Took a long time, but that's great. And so that's what I'm holding on to right now, is sort of the acknowledgement of, you absolutely have to acknowledge the past and recognize how that impacts the present and obviously the future. But I tend to be in that sort of lane of more focusing on, okay, let's build upon this win. Let's continue to build upon these wins, as small as they may be in some cases, and as large as they may feel in some cases. Both are great, but let's build upon those, and try not to look back too much.
So looking forward,
I think Jay makes an excellent point too when it comes to the kids space. It's not just the content. Very much in the TV animation and the animated kids space, so much of it is dependent on some of the other sister departments like packaged goods or consumer products. And so you have to remember, it's not just, well, we need to see more diversity on television, but then we need more Black dolls, and we need our partners to say we're going to champion Tiana dolls and Black dolls and Black Panther. And Jay, sorry, I know that Disney's sort of getting picked on right now, but at the end of the day, I've worked in kids animation and kids properties, throughout many times in my career, and very much it's about what is going to be the consumer product's footprint. And so there needs to be, it touches everything. So it's, I worked for a little while, we distributed Strawberry Shortcake. Now she's a little, redhead kid, but she also has a ton of diverse friends. And so it's about leaning on the makers to say, well, her little Black friend, her little, brown friend, her little, Asian friend, we need to make more dolls like that. Yes. And you're not going to sell those dolls if you don't market to those folks. So at the end of the day, when me as a Black mom, if I know that there's going to be more Black American Girl dolls, more Black Strawberry Shortcake friends, I will go and support that. And then it starts to, become this, this growing thing and this success. So I think, entertainment, because it's so visual and it's right in front of us, gets picked on a lot. But at the end of the day, in the kids space, there's so many other partners that can help us as well. Because if the Black dolls are selling, we'll get more stories around that Black character. And it just keeps going. So I love the fact that Jay mentioned that, there's other things that happen, like with the Disney ride. And let's face it, you can't create a Disney ride, if I remember correctly, in 5 minutes. Like, it takes years And so at the end of the day, maybe when they realized how popular Tiana was, they started working on the ride. But again, it takes years to get that going. And so I think it's a little bit of letting folks know, what we're doing, making sure that there is, all that marketing without DEI itself becoming a marketing gimmick. It's more like, let's just keep talking and telling and marketing and telling our consumers that we have the dolls to support. We have the wheelchair to support a differently abled doll. And from that, those stories will flow because it all connects.
Let me ask if there are, or what other new stories that are coming down the pike that you would support. Who's telling stories? Who's telling them? What are we telling? What are the newer stories that are coming that people will support? New content.
I mean, I'll just jump in only because I'm working in content right now. But if you look at what's been getting a lot of, focus. I mean, last year there was Coda, so who knew that, there would be an audience for a movie about the child of deaf parents or the child of deaf adults. And again, it's not something that was marketed to me, again, as a Black audience member, but as a mom, as a person that has diversity in my own family in terms of differently abled people. It was a beautiful story. And when you got right down to it, the themes were super relatable, super authentic, as Jay, I think, mentioned that word, and really relatable because when you got right down to it, it's about a young girl who was really at odds with her parents. It was a generation issue. The fact that she was child of deaf adults was just a new lens, which was interesting. But the themes were completely universal. It was mother and daughter fighting about what she wanted to do with her life and having a boyfriend. And then the same thing when you look at some of the African stories that some of our, distributors are really getting into. These are stories coming out of Africa, not African stories being told by North American, creators.
Right.
Again, very different. They're bringing in language of our ancestors that we may have forgotten or not known. But when you get right down to it, a lot of these stories are super universal. It's sisters arguing with each other. It's, who ruined Christmas, and it's wonderful stories. And I think that when we start to see more and realize that they are relatable and they will sell, because the story itself is relatable, that's when we start to see, okay, we just don't need one or two stories. These stories are universal.
Yes.
So even though I don't have a lot of tenure in this industry, I'd say we need to talk more about the word risk and what that means. And I think that's our barrier often. So risk. So why should I tell the story of a disabled family or an LGBTQ family or a Black family? It's not been common. So everyone worries that will this sell? Will we alienate and lose our audiences? Am I only catering to the margin? So those questions and conversations happen. And unless we take the chances, take the risks, and keep pushing the conversations, we won't have these little mini successes that we're happy about, having racialized dolls out there that really authentically represent the cultures and characters that we intend them to. And there's more bandwidth, but risk tends to hold us back so many ways. And so we always have to raise that and then address it and combat it.
So I have a question. It might be an elephant in the room, but with all of this DEI, all this DEI push and talking about risk, did January 6th happen because there was all of this DEI movement and a lot of stories, and we're being seen, and the different stories are being told and shared, and then all of a sudden there's a pushback, and all of a sudden we see them being very upset that there's a bunch of different images, stories, orientations being told and given life. Is that risk too? Farrell, is that risk? Is that the risk you're talking about?
I was going to bow out and claim I'm Canadian. I've fully watched what happened live and covering it since, been really irate about it. Sadly, and again, I acknowledge reality. Sadly, that is a risk. It's a reality. People are saying, okay, enough of them. And I heard statements and phrases like, we're taking back, excuse me. This was not your land in the first place. You're taking back what you think is rightfully yours, and you're putting up your stance, and you're, oh my goodness, it was obnoxious. And yes, that's a risk, and it actually became dangerous for some people. And I think a lot of us will face that kind of backlash through emails and messages and phone messages, etc. Too much and enough of that, and stop doing that. But I'd say that's connected. Sadly, that is a risk. But do we stop the movement? Do we shut down? Do we go home? Do we abandon the people we're here to support, the stories we're trying to tell, to show the representation in authentic ways? Do we stop because of that? No, I always say this kind of work, I say this all the time, DEI work is not for the faint of heart. Sometimes people give a fun presentation, it's not all fun. It is hard work a lot of the time.
Let me ask where you're finding talent, because we also know that they say, oh, well, we just don't find enough qualified people of color, etc. Where do we find them? Yeah.
Can I grab this one?
Come on.
So I think something that's really exciting that I've seen come over the last couple years is people creating their own opportunities and not waiting for big studios to validate them that they're storytellers, or that they need to wait for their turn or like give approval. Like people, there's so many different platforms out there, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, that allows people to create. So even Webtoons, like so many cool platforms. Now I've also seen studios pop up, whether it's 9B Collective, which is the first Black-owned concept art studio, or it's Chris Wimberly's studio Smokescreen, which just launched a couple months ago. And both of them are about mentorship in getting people ready to get into the studio system. Yes. And then at the same time, being able to produce stories that have diverse narratives. So I'm finding that more of these sorts of studios are popping up to not wait for the bigger studios to solve, but they're taking it upon themselves to create opportunity for people and for themselves, so that they're not waiting for a turn to be made. So definitely check out 9B Collective and Studio Smokescreen. Really great opportunities for up and coming artists with great mentorship and great community. It's really great.
I think that's awesome. So because we have a lot of young people who will be joining us for the festival, I would like each of you to tell them how they can share their talents and gifts with you. How do they reach you? How can they be found? Alison, thank you for saying create on TikTok, create on the platform that you're on. Just get your work out there. Let them know, if you will. How do we share my gifts with the world? Jay, tell me. Tell us.
You email me.
Okay.
That's my world. Basically, we do a lot of school outreach. I do a lot of panels and podcasts, and oftentimes I'm told by the facilitators who do this thing, so like, no, don't give your email, you'll get inundated. and that is actually true, absolutely true. And at the same time, you know what, it's my job.
It's right.
I embrace that job. And while what that means is I may not get to you immediately because of so many, but we get to you. And so from that standpoint, I offer up my email address, and we have conversations. That was the first thing with this expanded role that I decided to do, that I wanted to make sure I was hearing people before I made any sort of, or developed any sort of initiatives or plans of action or what have you. It's just like, what are people thinking about Disney, and especially in TV animation in my area? What are they missing? What's the gaps? What are they looking for? What is this the first person they got to talk to? And so that's, from that standpoint, I made it part of the job to sort of do outreach in that way. Because look, I do the school routes, and I give presentations to organizations like Ghetto Film School, like Black and Animated, Latinx in Animation, all these great groups. But talent everywhere. And
Yes.
so to answer that question is just like, where do I look for it? Everywhere.
Yes.
That's my
Yes.
answer.
Yes.
My answer.
Excellent. So give us your email address.
All right. It's John.Francis, Francis at Disney.com. That's how you can get in touch with me.
Excellent. Thank you. Rio.
Well, I'm not going to give my email address. So, but what I will say is a lot of folks after AfroAnimation 2021 and also 2022 have reached out to me on LinkedIn. And I try very hard to respond like John or Jay rather, to everybody. And I may not accept your LinkedIn request because for me, LinkedIn, I use it in a very intentional way from a networking standpoint, but I'll always respond. And I've actually had some students reach out to me asking me if I will, give commentary on their thesis, on a pitch that they're doing. And I give of myself. I will absolutely say, yeah, let's get together. I can give you 15 minutes. I can, review, et cetera. Depending on what client I'm working for, I'm not able to always take a look at content, for different NDA and, legal reasons, but I'll always, respond. And I've had hundreds, I can say at this point, over the last several years of folks reach out, and I've helped them with, schoolwork, with pitches, with even just career choices, like the whole, I'm not a director, I'm not a writer, I'm not an artist. There's a lot of folks who don't realize how many behind the scenes jobs and careers there are, not only in entertainment, but in animation. And so I think AfroAnimation is an organization and a tool that we have, we're definitely in it for the long haul to make sure that people understand where they can go. And we reach out to people like Jay and 9B and some of the folks that Alison has mentioned have been a part of our outreach, who will say, listen, we have a YouTube channel where we're giving away free tools, or we've got partners who will say, yeah, for everybody that attended the conference, we're going to give them, a 3-month subscription to this tool that they may not have been able to afford before then. And so I say, listen, reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if I can't help you, I can try to put you in touch with somebody who can. Join AfroAnimation.com, look out for different festivals and conferences like this one, where you've got people that, Camille, you've reached out to and you're hosting to say, let me introduce you to this person. I bet you a ton of people who are going to be watching this never heard of me, never heard of Jay. Well, probably not Jay, because Jay, shows up a lot. But again, it's one of those things where they might say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that,
Yes.
there was a Black woman who spent 10 years at Disney, let me see what her experience was like. And I'm pro studio. I know studios get a lot of flack because of the numbers and because of some of the things, but I'm with Jay. I don't like to look backwards for too long, because if I did, I could just give you 20 years of my own backwards looking experience. But I will say there's been really good progress. We're not there yet. We're not even close to being there, but there's been some solid progress from places you'd least expect. So,
Alison, tell us how we can find you. How can we submit to you? How can we connect with you?
I would say direct message me, DM me on Instagram or Twitter or LinkedIn. I will respond. And then we have a lot of different opportunities with the BRIC Foundation, with our summit coming up, lots of volunteer opportunities. Our summit is going to be in person February 10th, but for our educational side, that will be virtual this year, 2023 and next year. And that will be on the Saturday, February 11th. So we will have both of those opportunities for people to continue to connect with us. And if you're interested in volunteering, please reach out to us on the BRIC Foundation.
Now, Alison, you said you're talent rep. So that's for writers.
Writers, directors, creators.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Farrell, how do we reach you?
Good. So 2 things that say, because literally I had a meeting this morning talking with our internal recruitment team about broadening our reach. So we will do the work of doing as much as we can to open our net so we catch people and find them where they are. So there's a whole lot of work we're doing internally. And the thing about how to reach me, since the day I got this job, as soon as it was announced, people started reaching out to me on LinkedIn.
Excellent.
And I respond. And I will also clarify, because a nice Canadian, but I'm going to tell you like it is. I respond to creators, I respond to students, I respond to people who are coming up with great creative ideas. At the same time, I have a whole lot of vendors reaching out to sell me stuff that I don't need. So I will tell you that the first group you will hear from me, second group vendors, I have a
Not so
plan,
much.
I have a lot of tools, I'm good. But young people and those who are in the creative spaces, feel free to reach out. The other thing I do, and I let my own people know, I try to direct them to the right internal person. It's not always me. In fact, it often isn't me. But I get enough information from them that I pass them on, and I'm learning and I'm listening to our responses, so we will build a better process going forward, so we have more room and capacity to help support people from all over. So that's my piece. LinkedIn.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. I have a real quick question, and it's an ideal question. And for an ideal world, and I know we don't live in one, but what's your perfect DEI world in animation? What would you like to see next? How can we change the world? How can young people change the world? What do you want to see?
Well, I'll jump in there. Again, I'm just going to steal quotes from people who've said them much more eloquently than me. But there was another Canadian, African Canadian. Her quote was, "Children cannot be what they cannot see." And so for me, it's about an ideal world would be where I'm in the development room or in the marketing room or in the DEI room, and it's not a thing. Like, it doesn't have to be an agenda point. It's literally just, here's the slate. Let's see what we have. And let's take a look at the stories. And it's less about, we've got 3 Black stories, we're good, and more about, what are the stories that we have? What are the universal themes that we're hitting upon? And how are we seeing them through somebody else's lens? And I just hope that that becomes sort of the regular part of the conversation. And then separately, for those, who are in recruiting and HR, allow there to be some tolerance for failure, because everybody fails. I mean, I think, it was a very prolific, producer director said, "I failed more times than anybody, which is why I'm so successful." And so you do have to give people an opportunity to succeed. And I will say this to organizations who are going outside of entertainment to get leaders, and then you're surprised when they are not successful after a year or two, maybe give them a different runway to succeed, because you brought them in from outside of the industry for a certain reason, but 2 years later, they are gone. And I'd like to know why and what their opportunity to fail was. And so for me, that's the ideal.
Farrell?
Good. I grew up in the church, and there's so many times I want to say, "Amen to that, sister. Amen to that." So amen to that, Brianne. And for me, it's more about how to get to this ideal state. And for me, it's really important that we continually listen to our people.
Yes.
Our people are our employees that are under our tent. Yes. Our people are the people knocking on our doors who want to come in, who are submitting their CVs and portfolios. Our people are students in schools. Our people are those who are watching what we put on the screen. Continually listen to them and hear what they say. Never think we've arrived. And if you check me out 20 years from now, I'll still say the same thing. Don't think, 20 years have gone by, we've done it all. We'll never have done it all. Keep listening for what the world needs and what is in the world. Are we representing all of them? And what else can we do? Keep listening.
Excellent. Alison.
I want people to stay activated and keeping the forward momentum. I want them to rally each other, hold each other accountable for intentions. I want to see us really think of different alternative pathways into our industry. Mm-hmm. I want to see the entertainment industry recognize animation, VFX, and gaming as a true medium and a place where we play ball like the rest.
Yes.
And we're not secondary. And thus getting the same opportunities for tax incentives and government assistance and education. So I think like all those areas, again, it needs to kind of work together, and of educating the educators, educating the parents, educating government, educating the studios, and working together as a unified front to continue making change and not taking the status quo on anything.
Excellent. Jay.
I guess my perfect DEI world would be a world in which we did not need to do DEI panels.
Indeed.
So that when you invite us onto these panels, we're talking about content, plain and simple.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about, our industry. So that would be my perfect world.
Amen. Amen. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we'll all be connected on LinkedIn soon. You guys stay connected to Animation in Black at SABIFF TV and live in San Antonio, Texas. Have an amazing day, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Who's the VIP headed to Hansbury Heights? It's special guest star Keke Palmer as CC Dupree.
She's the hottest rapper in the world right now.
Yes, my name's CC Dupree. Can you imagine how great this place is gonna be? Hansbury Heights, don't question me. I'm so good, so true. Say yes to me. We should work together. You got skills.
Hit play and clear the way. My name is Karma and I'm on the road to greatness. Lyrically gifted because of my imagination. Is Karma ready for her big break?
Millions are going to hear your song. You're gonna be huge.
And what's the real reason Cece's in Hansbury Heights?
See you later.
Watch the 3-part Karma's World special and find out.
Like, go do it right now.
I've got to see this.